Okay, so in the previous video, I went ahead and set up the flow of the particles and got them working the way that I want them to. Again, you're more than welcome to go into the liquid water material node and play around with the pressure settings and stuff. Even add some viscosity if you want, just to get, whatever effect you like. I'm going to go with this. Now, you've probably been wondering up to this moment in time that, these particles, yeah, they flow down, they interact with collision objects, and they clump up and adjust to the pressure settings and viscosity and all that stuff. However, it doesn't look like water. It just looks like a bunch of marbles being dropped into an empty sink. So how do you get this stuff to look like water? That's probably the million-dollar question you're asking yourself. Well, I'm going to cover that in this video. We're going to go ahead and get started. To make particles look like water, we basically mesh them. We create a polygon mesh that adheres to these particles and basically conforms to them, and this ends up creating a mesh that can look like water. Then from there, you can add a shader that looks like water, like a transparent shader. You can add a shader that looks like milk, use some subsurface scattering, or do whatever you want. Okay? But the mesh is really important because that's going to be what you use to basically create something that looks like a fluid. So how do we do that? Well, SoftyMod conveniently includes something called the emPolygonizer. And this was created by Eric Moots, a very, very talented CG artist and technical guru. He's really good and does some excellent programs, plugins for SoftyMod. You might want to check them out at his website. Basically, his Polygonizer tool is included inside of SoftyMod, and it can work through ice for many different things, but it works really, really cool when you combine it with the Lagoa fluid system. So how do we do that? Pretty simple. All you need to do is make sure your point cloud is selected. Then go to the Create menu, go down to Polygonizer down here at the bottom, and you're going to see a Surface from Point Cloud option. Go ahead and just select that. That'll automatically create a mesh, as you can see in the viewport, that is doing some funny stuff here. It kind of looks blobby. It looks like it's trying to follow the particles and stuff. We just need to adjust some settings to get it to look good. So if I go to the main tab over here of the Polygonizer PPG and I'm going to lock it down, I'm going to be using this PPG quite a bit. It's actually pretty straightforward and simple. The main settings you're going to play with are actually located here in the main tab. So you've got some surface settings like ISO level and detail. And then you've got some blur ISO field and smooth mesh settings. These are going to help to smooth stuff out if it looks a little bit too blocky. So let's have a look at some of these settings. So here's the actual mesh. If I look at this, and let me actually maximize this view here so it's a little bit easier to see. So you can see the mesh is created and it conforms or tries to conform to the particles, and you can see right now it's a very primitive mesh. It's very low res, so it looks blocky and stuff. If I were to render this out, you see how it looks. Doesn't look too great. Looks a bit too blocky. Another thing that I want to do real quick before I move forward, I'm going to take the point cloud, which is the particles themselves, and I'm going to go to its visibility settings, and I'm going to turn off the render visibility, because right now these little spheres are actually rendering in the scene, and I don't want them to. I'm trying to render out the mesh here, not these little blue spheres. So now if I render out, you can see I just get the mesh, and it doesn't look very good. So to increase the detail, just increase this detail parameter, and as you do that, you notice that the mesh becomes higher res, and if I select it, you can see the wireframe. The lower the detail, the lower res the mesh, the higher the detail, the more polygons you're going to get, the more triangles. This will create a more detailed mesh, but at the same time, it's going to be a heavier mesh. So just something to take into consideration. Now, the ISO level, the lower the ISO level, the less accurate the mesh is going to be, in the sense that the mesh is going to kind of blow up a little bit, or a lot in this case. If I increase the ISO level, the mesh will try to conform to the particles as much as possible, which could mean losing some of the volume of the actual mesh. You can see some areas where there's particles, the mesh doesn't conform and it doesn't follow too well. Okay. Down here we've got the ISO field parameters, so I can increase the strength here, and you can see the effect that has. And I can increase the amount of iterations, kind of smooth stuff out a little bit. And then we have a smooth mesh parameter, so we can increase the strength of this. This is going to make us lose some volume, but it's going to smooth out the mesh more. So if I lower the ISO level, you can see as I lower the strength, let me get a little bit closer here. This is with a low strength. If I increase the strength, I lose some volume, but the particles kind of get smoothed out a little bit more, or a lot more in this case. The ISO field does something very similar, so you can play with these settings until you get yourself a fluid shape that you are happy with. So something like this, might look pretty good. Let me lower the detail level a bit because that is a little too high res. So if I play back the simulation, you can see that the mesh, every frame is being recalculated and reformed to try to fit with the particles as much as possible. And this mesh is what's going to create your fluid effect and make your Lagoa effect look like if it was liquid water or some kind of fluid or something like that. So you can see how this starts to look. So what you want to do at this point is you want to create a particle system that outputs a very good mesh, because remember that the mesh is following the particle behavior. Okay, so if you have a really good detailed particle system, you're going to get yourself a pretty good detailed mesh. If you have a very low quality particle system, then your mesh is going to reflect that and it won't look too good. So one thing that I strongly recommend is, if I go back to my ice tree, make sure that you have a particle emission with the Lagoa particles, the little blue spheres. Make sure that your particle emission is good. Make sure that you're happy with it and it's pretty detailed. That way you'll get yourself a good mesh, and you won't have to fiddle too much with the mesh parameters, because if you have a good particle emission, then you're going to have a good mesh. So keep that in mind. When you're happy with your particle emission, well, then we're not going to mess around with it anymore. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to end this video, and in the next one I'm going to talk about the Lagoa Fluid Shaper. Right now this mesh looks pretty decent, but it can look a whole lot better, and we can do that using the Lagoa Fluid Shaper, but I'm going to talk about that in the next video.